You drove home in complete silence tonight. No music. No podcast. Not because you forgot. Because something in you needed the quiet, the way lungs need air after being held underwater. And now you're sitting in the parked car, engine off, key still in your hand, and you're not ready to go inside yet. It was a good night. You laughed. You said all the right things. Nobody could tell, but somewhere around hour 3, you used up something you couldn't name. You spent the rest of the evening performing fine, having a great time. Now it's past midnight. The car is the only place in the whole day where nobody needs anything from you yet. You know this feeling exactly. The weight of it. The relief of it. And underneath both of those, quietly, always, the same question: is something wrong with me? The answer starts in the brain, and it's not what you've been told. Hans Eysenck was a psychologist at the University of London. Starting in the 1960s, he spent years mapping a finding that overturned everything assumed about people like you. He wasn't studying personality quirks, he was measuring brain activity. What he found: some people's brains are already running hotter. Not metaphorically. Neurologically, people who prefer quiet, who find conversation expensive, who need solitude after being around people, have a higher baseline level of cortical arousal. Their brains start the day already closer to their optimal stimulation level. So when noise arrives, conversation, crowds, a party at hour 3, it doesn't invigorate them, it overloads them. They hit the threshold faster. Not because they're anxious, not because they're shy, not because something is wrong with the wiring, because the hardware was calibrated differently. The person next to you at that party heard the same music and felt energized. You heard it and started counting the minutes. The silence you crave isn't retreat. For your system, silence is the optimal state. But that only explains the threshold. It doesn't explain what happens inside the signal itself. Then there's Elena on. In 1996, she identified a trait present in roughly 1 in 6 people, also observed across more than 100 animal species, which suggests it isn't a modern malfunction. Evolution kept it. That means it works. She called it sensory processing sensitivity. What it means without the clinical language: some people don't just hear the conversation, they receive it. The subtext. The tension underneath the words. The thing the other person almost said, but didn't. The weight in the pause before they answered. A conversation that costs one person 5 units costs this person 25. Not because they're fragile, because they're receiving 5 times the signal. So when the evening ends and you close your door and something in your whole body just settles, that isn't ordinary social exhaustion. That's a processing queue clearing. Silence isn't about escaping people. It's the recovery window that makes depth possible. Now here's the part that's slightly absurd and also very specific. If you're one of these people, you've almost certainly developed workarounds. One in particular: wearing headphones in public with nothing playing. Not music, not a podcast, just wearing them. A biologically plausible reason not to make eye contact with a stranger for the next 40 minutes. The headphones say occupied, so your face doesn't have to. It's not antisocial. It's resource management. You figured out how to protect your bandwidth before there was even a word for bandwidth. But here's where the story gets more honest. A psychoanalyst whose 1997 book, The Call of Solitude, made a quiet and radical argument, was working with John Bowlby's attachment theory, the foundational idea from the 1960s. That human beings need connection to develop well. She agreed with it. And then she said, she called it the alternation principle. Healthy human beings move rhythmically between togetherness and solitude, like breathing in and breathing out. One is not the healthy version. One is not the broken version. For your entire life, the culture around you named only one of these as a need. Nobody told you that the alone time was the exhale, that you weren't avoiding life, that you were breathing. And here's the layer that almost nobody reaches. Stephen Porges is a neuroscientist at Indiana University. His polyvagal theory, first laid out in 1994, maps something precise and a little unsettling. The body decides which state it's in before the conscious mind does. He called it neuroception, the body's subconscious scan of the environment, running constantly below awareness, reading every room before you've formed a single thought about it. For most people, other humans register as safe by default. For some people, the equation runs differently. If you grew up in a house where human presence was unpredictable, where a parent's mood could shift the atmosphere without warning, where you had to read the emotional weather of a room to know if tonight was safe, your nervous system catalogued a lesson nobody taught it. It learned people are activating. Enough that conversation never became fully neutral. Enough that silence, real, uninterrupted silence, became the signal the body was waiting for. The one that meant nothing is coming. You can breathe now. Imagine being 7 years old. The front door opens. You don't know yet if it's a good night or a bad one. There's a 3-second pause before the footsteps reach the kitchen. In that pause, every sense in your body is reading the silence, listening to what it means. Silence as warning, silence as relief, silence as the space between threat and safety. Your nervous system learnt this without being taught. And years later, in an apartment at midnight after a party, when you feel yourself exhale fully for the first time all day, that exhale has a history. The love of silence isn't always aesthetic. For a significant number of people, it's memorial. The body recognizing the only state where it once learned it was allowed to rest. That's not a flaw. That's a record of survival. Someone has been lying about happiness, or at least leaving something out. For decades, studies showed extroverts were happier. The implication was clear: if you're not social by nature, you're missing something. Probably something that's your fault. What those studies were measuring: social quantity, time spent with people, reported mood in social settings. They were measuring fish on how well they climb trees. Research from Carleton University in 2014 found that when introverts experience self-chosen solitude, not loneliness, not forced isolation, but voluntary alone time, they report higher mood stability and vitality compared to their own baseline in social settings. Not sadder, steadier, more themselves. Susan Cain documented this in Quiet in 2012. She called it the extrovert ideal, a cultural architecture built on the assumption that the ideal person is gregarious, loud, and most alive in a room full of people. That architecture doesn't just inconvenience people who prefer silence, it teaches them that their natural state is a deficiency, that the thing they need most is the thing they should apologize for. You were never broken. You were being measured by the wrong instrument. People who love silence, who genuinely find it more comforting than conversation, are often the most present companions. Not because they're quiet, because they don't need the air filled, because what they offer is presence without requirement. That is rarer than it sounds. One person on Reddit put it this way: relationships where we feel each other and see each other, without the need to fill every space with words, those are the good ones. And comfortable. That's not a consolation prize. That's a different kind of intimacy, one that happens to require silence to exist. The preference for silence was never the problem. The problem was a world that decided silence was the problem. You're still in the car maybe, or you're inside now, lights low, phone face down, the apartment finally quiet around you. And the quiet is doing what it's always done. holding you in a way a room full of people never quite could. That's not damage. That's just the oldest language your body knows. If there's a silence in your life that you've been quietly apologizing for, drop one word in the comments for where you feel it most. Just one word. You don't have to explain it. That's the whole point.